What is good, people? Welcome back to another video on 8 Count. In today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at UFC 279. I'm going to be giving you my reaction to the cards. As always, if you do enjoy the video, please leave a like, comment down below, letting me know your thoughts on UFC 279, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming content. Let's just get straight into it. I was so reliant on this card this weekend. So many events being cancelled here in the UK, like football and the boxing with Savannah Marshall versus Clarissa Shields being cancelled as well. So it was a bit of a bummer for me. But the fact that this UFC card went ahead gave me a little bit of hope to go through the weekend because it was pretty dry other than that. But in terms of the UFC, the card kind of fell apart. I was going to give you my updated picks, but I kind of left it a little bit too late. I was trying to stay up on the Friday night to see what was actually happening with the card, but I kind of had an early night in the end. But ended up really playing it in the favour for certain fighters, and certainly for the UFC in my opinion. I think the card, the way it ended up, was a lot better than it maybe would have been. A lot more interesting matchups, especially at the top end of the card. The main event was Nate Diaz versus Tony Ferguson. Nate Diaz wins via 4th round guillotine. I thought it was a weird fight because I think we're so accustomed to looking at the sort of highest level now of MMA, especially inside the UFC. And this is almost a little bit of a throwback fight. Not saying that either fight is bad, but, you know, Nate's style really hasn't changed all too much. He's always had an awesome sort of jiu-jitsu game. And his boxing has always been a very good weapon for him in terms of, you know, he's very heavy on that lead foot and he's able to kind of, you know, chase after people and apply a lot of pressure with his boxing. And Tony Ferguson's a guy who is kind of weird in terms of you can't really say there's someone else who has a Tony Ferguson style. It's very unique to him. He looks to land elbows and knees in close. I was surprised he didn't go to the teep kick in this fight because that's normally one of his better weapons, especially when he's trying to apply pressure. I think you saw that in the RDA fight, which was super impressive, but you know, super unique in terms of the angles he uses to come in. But neither guy is kind of like super well-rounded in terms of the skill set on the feet, that they're like, you know, their kicking game and you know, punching, elbows, all this is all on the same sort of level like you would see with some sort of Muay Thai fighters. So it was a bit of a weird one in terms of watching it. I saw that Dustin Poirier said it was the Bum Olympics. I wouldn't go that far. I would just say it was quite a unique matchup in terms of how they would fight. I think normally either guy would face someone who is probably a lot higher level in a certain skill, and they'd use their certain sort of like uniqueness and weirdness in a way to kind of get the upper hand. But with both guys being so weird, it did kind of end to a weird sort of face-off. But the fight was very intriguing in itself. You know, Nate Diaz was certainly heavy on the legal leg as we expected, but actually checked from the early kicks from Tony Ferguson, leaving him with a massive gash on his leg, which was one of the weirdest sort of cuts I've seen in a while. You know, you're used to seeing it a lot in sort of kickboxing and that in terms of checks can cause, you know, cuts on the legs and they gash. And we've seen it a few times in the UFC. I think DC brought up the Luke Rockhold fight, but I've seen it a couple times other than that. But Nate Diaz did a good job, I thought, early on in terms of his boxing skills. You know, Ferguson definitely isn't the most defensive, you know, sort of fighter, and his defensive skills are not really the highest level in terms of the UFC. And it did leave himself open for some of Nate's counters. I thought he's doing a good job of using that right hook to, you know, kind of lead into his left straight. You know, he either uses like the jab, the right hook, or the sort of right Stockton slap. Tony Ferguson, on the other hand, he was doing a great job of, you know, continually going to the legs of Nate Diaz. You know, the outside leg kick wasn't working as well as he would have wanted. I'm pretty sure that cut would have left Ferguson with some damage on that shin. So he actually went to the inside leg kick, which I thought was a really unique sort of way to go about it, because not a lot of people do that. Normally, if we see a Southpaw versus Orthodox matchup, a lot of people actually neglect leg kicking. But Ferguson definitely didn't do that. He kept going to the legs and he was having a lot of success there. It looked like he had Nate hurt, especially on one occasion. But I think there's multiple times that Nate really kind of showed the damage it was having on him. Definitely affecting his base and some of the power he was able to produce. But he continued to chase down Ferguson. Ferguson with some weird sort of turning of the back at times. I'm not sure if he saw an opening maybe for a spinning elbow but just didn't throw it, or it was just bad sort of, I guess you could say, habits on his part. But, you know, Nate applied the pressure throughout the fight. It was working quite well for him. I felt like Ferguson would have done really well with a teep kick at times. You know, he could have gone high or to the body with it because, you know, Nate was very square on in the fight, but he didn't choose to do that. I felt like, you know, it seemed that Ferguson was getting hurt at times from some of the punches of Nate, and I didn't ever think Nate's had real power. I think a lot of it is down to his sort of willingness to throw multiple punches at a time. And the fact that he's very accurate in terms of where he fires his punches, you know, he finds the chin quite, you know, quite, you know, actively. And, you know, you saw in the Leon Edwards fight that it's not really the power, it's kind of the speed and the sort of precision he throws his strikes with. I felt like that cut over Tony Ferguson's eye was pretty nasty. It was almost like a Y, I guess you could say. But it was a nasty cut. In the fourth round, you know, I think Nate kind of buzzed him a little bit on the feet. Ferguson went for a takedown, which I think his corner was asking for. And when I was watching the fight, I was screaming for this fight to go to the ground because I thought it was going to be really interesting to see their sort of match up on the ground. We know that Tony Ferguson, you know, can find a Darce choke from basically fucking anywhere with his long arms. And, you know, Nate Diaz has always had an amazing guard. So it was going to be interesting. But, you know, Diaz was able to wrap up a guillotine as the takedown was, you know, kind of in session. And, you know, by the time they landed, I think Nate had to readjust once, but he had that guillotine in really tight. Ferguson was, you know, kind of had to tap or else he was going to sleep. It was a real tight one. And, you know, I think Ferguson has got a scary ground game, but at times I do wonder, is it a bit overrated? Because we saw what Kevin Lee was able to do when he got top pressure and he was fresh during the fight. And, you know, Nate doing this in the guard was something which was definitely a possibility, but I thought Ferguson's ground game was maybe a bit better. But, you know, he was tired, so there's other sort of reasons for it, I guess. But it was a super impressive win by Nate Diaz on his last fight in his UFC contract, and what a way, you know, what a send-off, I guess you could say. You know, the guy's kind of been treated like shit over the years, in my opinion. I know that the Diaz brothers are supposedly hard to work with, but I think he did a great job here. I think he kind of was blessed in terms of the matchup with Chimaev fell apart because, in my opinion, he had little to no chance in that fight, and he ended up with a matchup against Tony Ferguson, which was definitely more manageable, and in terms of the damage he was going to receive was certainly going to be less. So what a send-off for him now. He's free of the UFC. I think there's going to be a period of around a year that the UFC can match any other offers and stuff like that, but I do think we'll probably see Nate at some point next year, maybe in the early, you know, first quarter of the year, if not second. And I'm super intrigued to see what he does. I think, you know, he mentioned boxing. I don't know what sort of level. I feel like, you know, there's always been a lot of praise about the Diaz boxing and that they've sparred with Andre Ward and Ward rates him really highly, but I would like to see what would happen. I'm not sure what sort of level of opponent he'd be looking to fight, but anything too high, I think they would get kind of steamrolled a little bit. But hopefully we can see him in a good matchup where he's able to showcase his skills and, you know, pour it on someone late. For Ferguson, on the other hand, I'm really disappointed for him. You know, since that sort of knee injury, he just hasn't been the same. He's had some really tough matchups. And for me, one of the talent spots that he wasn't at the level he was once was that sort of Pettis fight. I think Pettis was one of my favourite fighters growing up, but he had such a sort of downhill sort of decrease. And at the time of the Ferguson fight, Ferguson was supposedly still one of the top guys. And Pettis had so much success in that fight. Yes, Ferguson won in the end. I think Pettis broke his hand, and I think Ferguson won the second round pretty handedly. But some of the success that Pettis was having in that fight kind of led me to think maybe he's not, you know, the same guy. But this, for me, clearly wasn't the same guy. I think Tony Ferguson throughout the years has had one of his styles, which has been scary. He's able to push the pace so high. He's not really worried about the grappling situations because he's so good at scrambling and finding positions to set up the Darce, whether that be on top or from the bottom. You know, for me, in terms of the matchup, it was an interesting one because, you know, he kind of came in after that Chandler knockout, which was one of the worst knockouts, you know, we kind of seen in the UFC. And for Ferguson, a guy with a granite chin, you know, which was never really KO'd or finished before, it was sad to see. And, you know, this matchup did give him that sort of ability to probably not be hurt too badly, but he did look a little gun shy at times, and, you know, the turn on the back really didn't look good for him. I'm not sure what's going to be next for him, whether he wants to fight still. Personally, I wouldn't mind if he, you know, called it quits, but you don't know what sort of situation he's in, trying to provide for his family. So I certainly would understand if he carried on fighting, but a change in sort of level of opponent would definitely be something I would like to see for sure. We'll move on to the co-main event. Hamza Chimaev's finishes Kevin Holland in the first round. It was either Darce or an Anaconda, I think. Could be completely wrong on that. But what can we say? I think the start of the fight really left a poor taste in my mouth. You know, Kevin Holland going for the, you know, touch of gloves, and, you know, maybe he shouldn't have, because Hamza Chimaev just ran straight through him. You know, kind of not fake glove touch, but just not acknowledging it at all and just going straight for the legs. Did leave me a bit, yeah, I didn't like it, but it is what it is. I think what we saw, though, was Hamza's, you know, sort of pressure and willingness to get that takedown. He was, you know, all on it. I thought Kevin Holland did a great job of scrambling out of stuff at times. You know, he did get back to his feet the once, but Hamza very easily took him back down straight away. They ended up in that position for the choke, and, you know, I thought Kevin Holland was doing a great job in terms of trying to create space using the shin. But I feel like Chimaev was only buying his time until he could really cinch up the choke, and once he did, you could tell it wasn't going to be long before it was over. It was a super disappointing performance on Kevin Holland's part, because, you know, he wasn't able to show any of his ability, and that's always going to be one of the things which hurts most. I think a lot of fighters probably go in there and, yes, they're scared of losing. They're not scared of being hurt. But I think it's that scared of not being able to perform at the level you know you can, and I think Kevin Holland wasn't able to do that on that night. Maybe Chimaev was too good, but I do wonder, you know, what would happen if they fought again. Going into the fight, it might sound crazy, but I fancied Holland late on. I felt that, you know, potentially he could tie up Chimaev at times and really slow him down, make him use that gas tank in exchanges on the feet. I thought his length could potentially give Chimaev some problems, and we would see a bit more of a drain Chimaev down, you know, the last stage of the fight, and maybe Holland would be able to take advantage of it. But that didn't come to terms. You know, Chimaev gets him out of there very, very quickly in a very impressive fashion. Calls out everyone, which is, I guess, I guess you come to kind of expect it now with this guy. It was a super impressive victory on his part, and what's next for him, I think, is really difficult. I think the UFC are going to be a bit pissed off of him in terms of the way he kind of screwed the card up, but also kind of improved it at the same time. For me, I don't think they're going to give him a title fight straight away. I think it's got to be one of the top contenders at welterweight or middleweight. For me, the fight I love the most is the Robert Whittaker fight, and I was thinking it after the fight finished. But then I saw a clip of him online saying that how he kind of really likes Robert Whittaker. He'd love to train with him, and that he's someone that he wouldn't want to fight because he actually likes the guy. So that kind of threw that one out the window. But I'm like, what a fight that would be. You know, Hamza's ability to kind of, you know, force himself into these dominant positions, whereas Whittaker's got that ability to stay out of range. He's got fantastic footwork, brilliant scrambling ability, and, you know, really good takedown defense, and his hands are lightning. His kicking game is brilliant. It would have been a super interesting matchup. But I think that leaves us with only a couple really decent options. I think that Cannonier would be a good one if they wanted to do that middleweight, because they don't trust him at the welterweight limit. Other than that, though, I think if you look at the welterweight options, I think a lot of guys are matched up. I'm pretty sure Sean Brady's matched up, but I think that would be a solid fight for Hamza, and probably more of a winnable fight for Hamza. I think that's one of the fights that he would favour, because because Sean Brady also likes to get in these wrestling sort of positions, and I feel like he would back himself over Sean Brady in that matchup. I think Covington is the obvious one people are talking about a lot. But if you want to kind of bring him back down to earth, if you're the UFC and you want to say, fuck you, you're not getting a number one contender matchup even, I think you give him Shavkat. And even though it's a matchup which I think is, you know, maybe it's one which is just meant to happen down the line, maybe you do it straight away. Yes, it's not necessarily the biggest matchup in terms of names, but in terms of the matchup and the skill ability, maybe Shavkat is even a better prospect than Chimaev is. Shavkat, obviously very good on the feet, extremely good in terms of, you know, applying himself in top position. I think it'd be a super fun matchup, and if they made that, I would be super happy. I don't think they will though, but I would like it because it kind of send a message to him. You know, you're not too big at the moment. We control what's going on. And, you know, it also force Hamza to fight a fighter who could potentially give him really big problems on the feet and on the ground. So that's one I would like to see. For Kevin Holland, yeah, it's kind of a backward step, which is unfortunate because he's coming in with two really good victories out welterweight over Cowboy and Tim Means. I think, you know, losing to Chimaev certainly isn't the worst thing that could happen. I think a lot of people are probably going to lose to him. I think it's probably more the fact that he wasn't able to showcase himself. In terms of how quickly he can get back in now, I'd probably say pretty quick, right? Because didn't really take any damage. It just didn't go his way. I think he said that the Daniel Rodriguez fight is still one that he would like to have, which certainly would be a fun one. I do fancy Holland in that matchup though. And I think he also called out Wonderboy. I think Wonderboy would be an excellent matchup. You know that Kevin Holland isn't really going to look to grapple with him, and it's probably going to stay on the feet. And I think it would be a good one for some sort of fight night main event. Both guys got really big names. You know, could definitely sell tickets if you wanted to do it at some sort of arena. And I think it would be a good fight to make for both guys. So that's one I'd be interested to see. We move on to Jing Liang versus Daniel Rodriguez. I really struggled to see how the Leech lost this fight. Personally, I had it 29-28, which means, yes, someone could have given Daniel Rodriguez rounds 1 or 2 on my scorecard and given him the win. I just didn't see it. I felt like, you know, Leech did a really good job against a real difficult opponent, especially when you kind of consider the fact that Leech had to cut more weight and, you know, Daniel Rodriguez only had to make like 180. I think he came in at 179. Leech had to come in at 171. And for me, I think you saw why Rodriguez is a tricky opponent for a lot of guys. His boxing ability is definitely there, and he kind of reminds me of the Diaz brothers a little bit. He's a bit different now. But I thought what Leech did really well was his ability to not really look for that home run. He was just focused on his fight. He was very loose, which was kind of the opposite of Rodriguez. I think Rodriguez is more of a static fighter, especially in terms of his footwork. But he does let the hands go pretty well. I think Leech was finding, you know, all sort of different techniques that he liked. You could see him going back and forth between orthodox and southpaw, which kind of showed how confident and how comfortable he was in the matchup. I think he buzzed Rodriguez once or twice. I'm just disappointed, man. I felt like Leech won it, but fair play to Daniel Rodriguez. It was an opponent change on short notice for him, and it was a real top welterweight opponent, which, you know, that's where Rodriguez normally fights. The only reason it was a catchweight with Kevin Holland in the first place was because he was coming on a short notice. For Rodriguez, this is a huge win. You know, a proper contender at welterweight he was able to get a victory over. He's had some really fun fights in the past, and I think the Kevin Holland fight would suit him. You know, I think it's a hard matchup for him in terms of, like we kind of saw in this one, Kevin Holland very good at moving. So was Leech, very loose. I think the reach would give Rodriguez problems, but he's so kind of gritty in terms of his boxing sort of skills that he's difficult for anyone. But I'm disappointed for Leech. Hopefully he can get a big fight soon. You know, we all love the suit, and hopefully we see him again soon because he's a fun guy. And considering I don't understand, you know, the language he speaks, he's one of these guys who's kind of able to come across as really genuine and a real likable character without understanding him, which is kind of rare to see. So I'm a big fan of Leech. Irene Aldana beats Macy Chiasson. I don't know how to say her name still. Chiasson, with one of the most unique sort of fight enders, I guess you could say. You saw Irene kind of dominate the first round. Macy kind of took the second round, in my opinion. It all came down for the third round. Macy did have top control, but you saw Irene do a good job of being able to push her off the hips and kind of have her in a position where she could throw the up kicks. And she threw an up kick which landed on the body and somewhere around the liver area. I'm not sure if it was, in the end, the liver which hurt Macy or if it was some sort of broken rib. But all of a sudden, Macy went to the ground and everyone was kind of in shock, like, what's going on? Was it a low blow or something like that? But no, it was a liver shot or rib shot, whatever you want to call it. And it finished the fight. And it's one of the only times, I mean, it's rare to see an up kick finish. We have seen them and, you know, it's awesome. But to see an up kick finish to the body, just so rare. I haven't seen it before. Maybe you guys could name some sort of examples in the comments below, which I don't know about. But I was super impressed with both girls. I thought Macy coming in would actually struggle a lot more. But she put on a really good performance in the end and can really be proud of herself. But Irene, she did show that grit and she was able to get through it and an amazing finish. And, you know, I don't know if she got a bonus in the end, but something so rare definitely deserves one. We move on now to Johnny Walker taking on Ion Cutelaba. I felt it was a hard fight to pick in terms of, you know, Ion does get caught on the feet, but his grappling ability is so good. And Johnny Walker just hadn't really found himself at, you know, in Ireland yet, and it was taking time. But in this fight, it was a weird one. Ion Cutelaba was able to get the fight to the ground, but Johnny Walker did a great job of getting back to his feet. From the clinch, he was able to take Ion down and eventually find the neck and finish the fight with a rear naked choke in the first round. And in terms of all the outcomes that I was thinking about for this fight, this was one I really did not see. And it was super impressive on Johnny Walker's part. It was a big win because he needed something, you know, especially after the huge defeat. What's his name? I can't think of his name, but his last fight. I can see his face and everything, but you know, the guy who just beat Thiago Santos. It was a huge knockout defeat, and I can't stop thinking about this guy's name. So I'm gonna have to search it quickly. Johnny Walker. Jamal Hill, that's it. God damn it, that was a hard one on me. But yeah, that Jamal Hill knockout was really bad, and the way it kind of sent him flying back, he needed something here so he could push forward, and it's a huge win against a guy who is proven to be very dangerous. What's next for either guy, I'm not too sure. Johnny Walker, I think, is ranked now inside of the UFC. I feel like he's ranked at 205. Maybe he's not. But it's going to be tough for him because I think 205, especially over the past couple of years, you've seen a lot more of the younger guys breaking through, and they're very talented. Johnny Walker does seem to have a problem in terms of his defense at times, and that's going to always let him down unless he improves on that. But hopefully we can see that in the future. Hakeem Dawodu, I was shocked he kind of lost his fight to Rosa, but on the other hand, I'm like, why was I shocked? Juicy J is one of these guys who can be just so dangerous everywhere. You know, he's got a decent submission game, but on the feet, his range gives people a lot of problems. His movement gives people a lot of problems. And on the inside with his elbows and knees, he's always going to cause people problems. Hakeem, in my opinion, is the better striker overall, but he just got caught out in this fight. I think Rosa did a brilliant job, hurt Hakeem bad on multiple occasions, and in that third round, kind of just took his time and went through to the whistle and won a very well-deserved, you know, unanimous decision. UCJ is just one of these guys, man. I really like Julian Rosa. He's definitely someone you can put on any card against, you know, any decent opponent, and he's going to put on a show. And I think you can say the same for Hakeem. Really entertaining fighters at featherweight. You know, I think it's a tough one on Hakeem. He's definitely looked like a guy who has been on the brink of breaking into the rankings on multiple occasions. And once again, he falls short with a fight against Julian Erosa. Erosa, I mean, put him in there against anyone. I don't really care. He's so fun to watch. I think I watched this one with my dad, and I was going, he's going to go for a flying knee now in a minute, because it's just like so signature Julian Erosa to go up with that flying knee and stuff. A super fun fight. I was super surprised Erosa was able to pull it out the bag. I think Hakeem is probably going to want to fight pretty soon to kind of bounce back from that defeat. We'll move on to Geraldton Almeida against Anton. Coming into this fight, I said I saw the one highlight of Takauj, and he was super wild and fun to watch. I think he threw a head kick and missed it and came with a spinning back kick and maybe finished the fight inside like 10-12 seconds, something like that. But I said I was kind of shocked the odds, because on the last time I was doing my picks, they had the odds the other way around, and I was surprised that Geraldton was an underdog. But he was actually the favourite, and I think he showed the methods that he showed against Parker Porter, which makes him so dominant. I think on the feet he is very well rounded and very skilled, but when he gets on top, his pressure from top is frightening at times. And for one of these guys, looks like he can probably make 205 and fight at heavyweight pretty comfortably. He's a dangerous threat for everyone. I think you look at his record, I think he was like 14-2 coming in, or some 16-2. He's a dangerous guy. For Anton, this was a super tough matchup for your UFC debut. He looks like he's a fun guy in terms of the highlights I've seen from him. And, I don't think you can be too disappointed in the fact that you lose against someone as tough as Geraldton. The way Geraldton was able to kind of control him on the ground and eventually work his way to the submission was super impressive. I think we'll see Anton pretty soon, probably on one of the European cards, the next one they have. I think he's hailing from Sweden. So yeah, I look forward to seeing both of these guys. Geraldton is a definite prospect I'm keeping my eye out for, especially at either light heavyweight or heavyweight. I think at heavyweight, he's probably going to be one of the quicker guys, whereas at light heavyweight, he's going to have one of those sort of styles in which he can clamp down on people and really, kind of use his top pressure to the limit at 205. So he's definitely one of the guys I really want to look out for in the future. Jamie Pickett lost a disappointing one, but I just want to talk about Jake Collier versus Chris Barnett before we got out of here. Coming into the fight, I was pretty confident that Jake Collier would probably get the win. I felt like he was the better boxer of the two. And, in terms of technique-wise, he's probably the better. I think Chris Barnett, by far the better athlete. And somehow he pulled this one out the bag because he was down and out at the end of round one. Had some sort of weird problem with his jaw where he kept making this sort of weird face and his eye was basically shut. Collier, I thought, did a great job, especially on the inside, For a big guy, it wasn't just on the outside he was doing a lot of the damage. He was coming inside, getting, a hold of Chris Barnett and hitting him with some really nasty uppercuts, some short uppercuts on the inside, which were really effective. Shout out to Chris Barnett, man. He did miss weight, which is a bit of a poor sign. I don't know if he made it on the second attempt or not, so don't count me on that one. But I think he showed something I wasn't sure he had. Sorry, as I dropped my capo. He showed the fact that he has got that heart and he is a proper fighter. I think in the past, his last fight was a really disappointing one. But the fight before that, he got the really impressive knockout over Jean Belonte. But in this fight, he showed that he's got character, proper character. Do I ever think he's going to be elite heavyweight? I don't. I think he's too short. And I don't think he uses the sort of weapons you would need as a smaller fighter to the best of his advantages. However, I think he's going to be in, sort of fun matchups, kind of like someone like a Chase Sherman, who might not ever be the elite sort of heavyweight, but he's always going to be in fun matchups and put on great fights. For Jake Collier, this is a disappointing one. I really fancied him in this fight. He was a big favourite at minus 460. I would like to see him maybe try and get down to 205 again. He's very heavy at the moment, but he's a good fighter, man. He's very well-rounded, and this time it just went against him. Definitely an unfortunate one. I was impressed by the spirit that Chris Barnett put on in that matchup. It was a really fun card in the end, the prelims and the main card. I haven't even seen the early prelims yet. I didn't get round to it. I'm not sure if there's any of the fights that I really need to look out for. But here's what it is. What a send-off for Nate Diaz. Let me know your highlight of the card down below. Be sure to leave a like on the video if you've made it this far, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming content. Tomorrow I'm going to be putting up my picks for probably the next UFC event, which I think is Sandhagen versus Song Yadong. And I'm also going to be putting up a video giving you my prediction for Canelo versus Triple G, the trilogy. So be sure to look out for the channel on that one tomorrow, which will be the 13th or maybe the 14th. I'll pull it up. And I'll see you then. Take care. Have a great rest of your Monday. And I'll see you very soon. Peace.